October 15th, 1944, South Beveland Causeway approach, the Scheldt Estuary, Netherlands. The air here does not just feel heavy, it feels dead. A chilling, pervasive mist clings to the waterlogged fields, mixing with the stink of stagnant tidal mud and cordite smoke. The ground is a treacherous, sucking sponge, crisscrossed by irrigation ditches and shell craters filled with brackish, icy water. This is the Battle of the Scheldt, and the landscape itself is the first enemy. Hauptmann Heinrich Voss, a veteran staff officer with the German 64th Infantry Division, squints through powerful field glasses. He stands on a slight, ruined dike, the only solid ground for miles. Below him, the shattered terrain leads inexorably toward the Breskens pocket, where thousands of his comrades are trapped. The task of defending the approach to the vital port of Antwerp falls to his division, and they have prepared this hell with professional malice. Voss turns to General Lieutenant Eugen Felix Schiele, the formidable and fiercely determined commander of the 64th. Schiele is a man hardened by years on the Eastern Front, his uniform immaculate despite the mud, his eyes sharp and analytical. General, the forward reconnaissance confirms it. Voss reports, snapping his binoculars shut. The Allied advance continues to push directly into our inundationsfeld, our flooded kill zone. They are moving along the exposed high ground, exactly where we expected them to. Schiele nods slowly, a grim, satisfied line across his face. Who are they throwing at us now? Voss, the Scots, the British veterans? No, Herr General. Intercepts and prisoners indicate it is the 4th Canadian Armoured Division. Specifically, a single battalion, the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada. Their insignia suggests they are rookies. Green troops recently moved up from supporting roles, likely untested in this kind of close swamp fighting. Schiele allows himself a thin smile. This is good news. His division is heavily dug in, positioned in concrete pillboxes and reinforced farmhouses, with the entire landscape pre-sighted for their MG-42 machine guns and 82 Whitmer flak guns. They are fighting on terrain of their choosing, against inexperienced troops. They will be slow, bogged down, and reliant on their heavy vehicles, which are useless here. Schiele observes, the mud will break their morale before our shells do. They are moving into a tactical slaughterhouse. Voss, we will cut the Argylls off, surround them, and collapse the entire Canadian sector with a swift counterattack. The German plan is flawless. They allow the Canadian unit to commit fully to the attack, pushing into the soft, central ground. The Canadian objective, a strategically critical crossroads deep in the mud, is a lure. Once the Argylls are engaged and separated from their heavy support, Schiele will seal the flanks with a rapid pincer movement, cutting the rookie unit to pieces. The surrender, Schiele calculates, will be swift. The pressure on the main Scheldt defenses will be relieved, and the Canadians will be taught a brutal lesson in European warfare. Meanwhile, a mile forward, deep in the sucking, freezing mud, Lieutenant James Jim Grant, commanding a platoon in the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, sloshes through a drainage ditch. The water is chest-high, stinking of diesel and decomposing vegetation. Move out, boys, keep the interval, Grant shouts, his voice hoarse. His men, farmers, students, and clerks just 6 months ago, are exhausted, their kilts sodden, their faces tight with fear and cold. As they breach the ditch and scramble onto the narrow, slippery path leading toward the crossroads, the expected explosion of enemy fire hits them. It is not just fire, it is a storm. The air fills with tracers, the sickening sound of mortars, and the rapid, continuous tearing sound of the German machine guns. Grant hits the ground, the impact cushioned by the mud. He realizes instantly they are exposed, pinned down, and the fire is coming not just from the front, but from the flanks they thought were secure. They have walked straight into the German trap. The rookies, already facing unimaginable psychological and physical stress, are now surrounded. General Schiele's trap has sprung perfectly. All that remains is the inevitable surrender. October 15th, 1944. Unternees Salient. Scheldt Estuary. The opening minutes of the ambush are a maelstrom of noise and confusion. The Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada, deployed with insufficient cover and bogged down in the swampy ground, take heavy casualties. The German machine gun fire, delivered with deadly precision from concrete positions, is relentless. The Canadian unit, meant to be the spearhead, is now the anvil for the German hammer. Lieutenant Grant screams orders, trying to consolidate the shattered remnants of his platoon. His rifle fires short, sharp bursts, directed at the closest visible muzzle flashes. The mud, their enemy minutes ago, now becomes their only ally, offering just enough concealment to prevent total annihilation. Dig in deep, use the irrigation banks," Grant yells, knowing full well that digging in means scooping thick, freezing slurry with their helmets and hands. The German fire intensifies. General Lieutenant Schiele, watching the engagement from his command post, feels a surge of professional satisfaction. His intelligence was correct. The Canadians were rookies, caught in a classic envelopment maneuver. Any veteran European unit, seeing the hopelessness of their position, surrounded, immobilized, and under fire from two sides, would, by the accepted calculus of war, be preparing to show the white flag. Schiele orders Hauptmann Voss to increase the rate of fire on the known Canadian positions, then to send forward a small detachment under a white banner to offer terms of surrender. The purpose is twofold: save ammunition and quickly capture the vital crossroads. Meanwhile, back in the mire, the Canadian rookies are not behaving according to the script. The initial shock of the ambush had passed, replaced by a cold, animal ferocity born of desperation and instinct. These men, many of whom had only known the regulated safety of training camps, refused to accept their doom. The veteran German fire, intended to break their will, instead hardened it. Private Donnie McLean, a young man from Hamilton, finds himself pinned behind the carcass of a water buffalo that had succumbed to an earlier shelling. His section commander is down, bleeding heavily. McLean ignores the torrent of MG-42 fire passing inches over his head, retrieves the commander's Bren light machine gun, and begins methodically spraying covering fire. His action is not a heroic charge. It is simply a desperate refusal to die passively. This desperate refusal spreads. The Canadian soldiers, unable to maneuver effectively due to the terrain and the overwhelming German fire, simply stopped retreating. They went to ground, fixed bayonets, and began returning fire with a steady, unexpected resilience. When the German surrender delegation attempts to advance, they are met not with raised hands, but with a vicious fusillade of Lee Enfield and Bren gunfire. The Canadians, trapped and fighting in conditions that would reduce veteran morale to dust, were refusing to even acknowledge the option of surrender. Schiele receives the report back from the retreating surrender delegation, his brow furrowed in confusion. They fired upon the Parley flag? Are they mad? They are mere infantry, pinned in a swamp, exposed to continuous heavy fire. This is not the Eastern Front. Voss, they should be broken, Schiele exclaims, his voice rising in disbelief. The general, an engineer of war who relied on predictable troop behavior, had miscalculated. He expected fear, but he received defiance. He expected demoralization, but he encountered an impassioned, unbreakable resolve. The rookie Canadian unit, though tactically encircled, was maintaining a firing line and holding the objective. despite the immense casualties mounting around Lieutenant Grant. The realization began to dawn on Scheel. These were not the tired, beaten units he had faced in Russia or the often hesitant units of other Allied sectors. This rookie unit was fighting with a spirit that defied their experience and their tactical position. October 16th, 1944, the German command post near Terneuzen. The situation was now profoundly confusing for General Lieutenant Scheel. 24 hours had passed since his perfectly executed trap was sprung. The Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders should have been a broken mess, their commanding officers dead or captured, their remaining strength disorganized and demoralized. Instead, they were still holding the crossroads, still firing and still refusing to yield even an inch of the miserable, waterlogged ground they had gained. Scheel pores over the detailed situation maps. His initial plan, a swift, decisive counterattack to roll up the Canadian flank, had stalled entirely because this single rookie battalion was consuming all his available fire and attention. "How many casualties are they taking, Voss?" Scheel demands, stabbing a finger at the map. "Heavy, Herr General. Very heavy. They are exposed, but they are managing to evacuate their wounded under cover of darkness and their own supporting mortar fire. They are not collapsing. They are consolidating." Hauptmann Voss reports, his voice tinged with professional respect, despite the immense frustration. The Canadian response was a study in grim endurance. Lieutenant Grant and the remaining company commanders understood their tactical position was hopeless. Their only objective now was simply to exist. Every minute they fought, every mortar round they absorbed, meant that the main Canadian thrust, the rest of the 4th Canadian Armoured Division, was being held up less aggressively elsewhere. Their sacrifice was buying time and pinning down an entire German infantry division. The mud and the floodwaters, which Scheel had counted on to destroy the Canadians, now became a factor working against the Germans. The difficult terrain prevented Scheel from massing his own infantry for a decisive, close-quarters assault without suffering catastrophic losses. His veteran troops, hardened by the attrition of the Eastern Front, were hesitant to enter the polder and engage in a messy, hand-to-hand fight with men who were clearly determined to fight to the last round. Scheel realizes the horrifying cost of his operation. He had committed a significant portion of his divisional reserves, units intended to defend the crucial ferry points and key inland towns, to eliminate what should have been a minor nuisance. Yet this minor nuisance was tying down his forces, chewing up his ammunition reserves, and, most disturbingly, shattering the morale of his own veteran troops. "They are firing on every movement. Herr General," a weary battalion commander reports via field telephone, "they are fighting like trapped animals. They have no strategic value where they are, but they will not break. We cannot advance without sustaining unacceptable losses." Scheel slowly replaces the receiver on the field phone. The tactical reality is undeniable. He had successfully encircled the Canadian unit, but the Canadians, by refusing to recognize their tactical defeat, had neutralized Scheel's strategic advantage. They had turned a military encirclement into a bloody, exhausting siege that he could not afford to sustain. His mission was to protect the escape route for his comrades in the Breskens pocket and hold the Scheldt approaches. He was doing neither. He was locked in a brutal, localized firefight against a unit whose willpower was proving to be a stronger defense than concrete. Scheel turns to Voss, his face drained of confidence. The battlefield lesson was stark and immediate. The Canadian Army was not simply a collection of men, it was an unbreakable force of will. "Voss," Scheel says, his voice flat with sudden, grim comprehension. "They are green. They are novices in this war, but they do not fight like men who believe they can be beaten. They fight like men who have a boundless reserve of replacements and material. Even if they do not, they fight like men who expect to win the war, It was more than just a realization about one rookie unit. It was the crushing understanding of the psychological gap between the two forces. The German army was fighting for survival, with exhausted resources and fading hope. The Canadians, even these untested boys, were fighting with a belief in eventual total victory that made their individual sacrifice seem inevitable and necessary. The rookie Canadian unit, encircled and outgunned, had won the moral victory. And in the brutal, final months of the war, the moral victory was everything. October 17th, 20th, 1944. The Scheldt battlefield. The stalemate caused by the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders' refusal to break had immediate and far-reaching strategic consequences that extended far beyond their flooded sector. General Lieutenant Scheele, forced to commit high-value reserves to a localized siege, could not execute his wider defensive maneuvers. His primary objective, to protect the crucial German escape corridor across the Scheldt and prevent the Canadians from seizing key causeways, was failing because he could not disengage. His troops were mired, both literally in the swamp and figuratively in the vicious, prolonged firefight against the rookie Canadian unit. Lieutenant Grant's men, though reduced to half strength and facing constant shelling, had achieved a stunning strategic goal: the successful holding of the line at the expense of German morale and maneuvering. The rest of the 4th Canadian Armoured Division, seeing the sheer, raw determination of the Argylls, pressed their attacks with renewed ferocity elsewhere. Knowing that their comrades were fighting a desperate delaying action, the other Canadian units, the veterans and the equally green, now understood the necessary cost of this brutal campaign. Scheele was forced to report a critical breakdown in his defensive timetable to the German High Command. The report, painstakingly detailed by Hauptmann Voss, did not dwell on the tactical failure of the encirclement. It focused on the psychological impossibility of dislodging the Canadian line. Scheele specifically noted the unprecedented tenacity of the young, supposedly inexperienced troops. They consume our resources and yield no ground. Scheele later wrote in a post-war account, reflecting on the Scheldt, "They fight for a ruined ditch as if it were the heart of Berlin." This kind of resolution, Herr Voss realized, is born of absolute conviction, the conviction that the war is already won by their side, and their sacrifice is merely completing a formality. This recognition was devastating. Scheele was an experienced professional. He could calculate logistics, terrain, and firepower. But he could not calculate the infinite reserve of moral will. His army was fighting under the crushing weight of inevitable defeat, relying on fear and discipline. The Canadian Army, even its newest recruits, was fighting with the freedom of men who knew their eventual victory was assured by a massive, untouched industrial base and a united national commitment. The sacrifice of the Argylls bought the precious time necessary for the main Canadian force to secure the flanking positions and ultimately isolate the entire German position in the Breskens pocket. The prolonged fight meant the vital German escape was choked off, leading to the capture of thousands of German soldiers and, critically, the final clearing of the approaches to the port of Antwerp. The Battle of the Scheldt was one of the grimmest and most decisive campaigns fought by the Canadian Army. The battle was won not just by superior firepower or logistics, but by the stubborn, almost illogical refusal of a single rookie Canadian unit to accept a tactical defeat. For General Lieutenant Scheele, the capture of that rookie unit's position, when it finally fell, hours later, costing him far more than it should have, was the moment the tactical field was overshadowed by the strategic doom. He realized then that the fight was no longer about holding territory. It was about confronting an enemy whose will to win was simply stronger than the German will to survive. The war, he knew, was lost.